Next on Investigative Report. Biased broadcasting service. The political leanings of public television. Commercial TV stations are held to a higher standard and catering to a broader political audience. Not so for public television, which no longer hides its leanings for one political party, simultaneously drawing the ire of Republicans in Congress and their returning leader. It would seem that the Crystal City headquarters of the largest media conglomerate in America had weathered past defunding conflicts with Congress. But is the Bird Network prepared for the largest storm on the horizon in the decoupling of taxpayer dollars from public television? Only time will tell, and future days on Sesame Street will be as sunny as the song implies. And now, biased broadcasting service, the political leanings of public television. One might wonder what harm could Republicans hope to address in a seemingly peaceful channel that only wishes to teach our children how to speak, spell, read, and write. Now, I would say plenty if you look at that publicly owned channel through a more objective lens, cleared of the feelings and emotions surrounding Sesame Street and our little children. And only then can one understand the behavioral programming of children given by one of the largest governmentally funded communication networks in the United States of America. Tonight we hope to address just some of the facts beyond the touchy-feely emotions of home improvement shows and cooking shows that have made public TV so well liked. The Investigative Report delved into well over 50 claims of blatant bias by national and local print media, as well as bloggers concerning left-leaning slants towards liberal voters at the literal expense of conservative voters who are taxed equally for public television's existence. So we're talking about two people that are taxed, but one person is respected. Now, how does a channel get away with slanting a message when all citizens who pay taxes finance that message whether they like it or not? The answer to that question is from the political party that it represents in Congress. Democrats have gone to bat for public television since they invented it in 1967. Now, in doing this, they assist in damaging citizens' constitutionally protected self-governing freedoms, including the children they purport to serve. Now, this is fundamentally why the battle between the liberals and conservatives has raged on since Richard Nixon sought to cut all funding to public television after he found out that Robert McNeil and Senator Van Ocker would anchor a new public broadcasting service television program. Now, in this one incident of liberal media reporters, Nixon deemed it the last straw. You're watching MNN, the Men's Channel. In that same Nixon White House, a 35-year-old lawyer sounded off about the blatant and liberal public television. He warned that conservatives would be confronted with a long-range problem of significant social consequences, that being the development of a governmentally funded broadcast system similar to the BBC. Now, the lawyer who gave Nixon that advice was Antonio Scalia. Yes, that same Antonio Scalia who will become a future Supreme Court justice. Now, the fact that a liberal administration invented public television was not simply a concern of one of the Republican president. It was seen that every conservative president since PBS inception has sought to either defund or drastically reduce its budget. Now, simultaneously, every Democratic president since its birth has sought to increase the budget of the public broadcasting service using taxpayer dollars. I wonder why. Now, I believe it is partially due to the difference in the representation of public radio and TV, that the organization has a tendency to pander to their benefactor while demonizing their detractors, one being the Democratic Party, the other being the Republican. Now, although a liberal president birthed the idea and pushed it through Congress, he still had some trepidation about the channel's ability to control people's ideas. As Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which set up public broadcasting in the United States of America, on November the 7th, 1967, he warned against it. He warned denigrating into services that would mislead as well as teach. Now, LBJ spoke into existence the dilemma that PBS and NPR have between trying to follow the charter or following the party that fought to fund them and what they were supposed to do. What PBS forgot during the 56 years that they had been in existence is that they didn't need to service the handlers but the public that they were deemed to serve. Now this leads us to the next presidential salvo fired across the bow of funding for PBS and NPR in the 1980s. Now while in office, President Ronald Reagan asked Congress for $37 million to be cut in public broadcasting funding. Now although PBS has many positive shows on Reagan, he was seen as no friend to public television. As administrations changed in Washington, the defunding mantra would stay on the minds of Republican leaders as President George W. Bush tried to cut funds for public television each and every year he was in office. But the fight over public funding is a gift to semi-private media conglomerate was not a White House contention alone. Congress of the U.S. would periodically weigh in on over-bloated budgets of an organization that could have easily taken care of itself. During that same time period, veterans on the Hill remember House Speaker Newt Gingrich's efforts in the mid-1990s to zero out funds for public broadcasting. They believe, as others did, that they should finance themselves just as any other television station does. And they do through commercials. Now, even today, people cannot fathom that an entity that does fund drives several times a year, stating that funding raise is critical to their operation, would then turn around and pay over $1 million annually to their CEO or the nonprofit agency. Now, even wilder is the fact that some of the people who operate puppets on Sesame Street earn about $300,000 per year doing that. Now, maybe this is what leads to the most memorable battle of them all, and that's Republican President Donald Trump and others before him knew that shows like Sesame Street merchandise their characters and pull in an estimated $15 to $17 million per year in licensing and merchandising fees. So a trend started to grow in the Republican administration that they should fund themselves. Now Trump mounted a bigger battle, as he says, never seen by the likes of anyone before. The 45th president not only wanted to cut the PBS budget entirely, but he sought to privatize the corporation for public broadcasting altogether, which in part funds PBS. Now Trump, like Reagan, saw no need to have public dollars supporting any agency that operated as a private entity that was already on par with other national media conglomerates. Worse still is that one of the other media outlets had government funding or protection from scrutiny. Other agencies don't have that. ABC doesn't have it. NBC, CBS doesn't have it. It would take attacks like these on bias from a Republican White House and lawmakers on Capitol Hill to trigger a long-awaited public response from the CEO of PBS, who would say that President Donald Trump's budget proposal would threaten the very existence of PBS at a time when commercial news media pushes Americans apart. And that's what they were doing. Now, she dismissed charges of left-wing bias and notions that PBS is geared towards coastal elites. She told a Detroit business group that the dissemination of federal arts funding proposed by Trump would pose an existential question for PBS survival in the country's rural communities. So she was pretending like it's going to hurt the rural communities. But long before the CEO of NPR and PBS had long denied accusations of liberal bias, a study by the Pew Research Center for People and the Press found that 61% of NPR's audience described itself as progressive, while only 15% described itself as conservative. Now, the difference between parties was smaller but still pronounced. 40% of NPR listeners described themselves as Democrat, while only 14% described themselves as Republicans. And it is those parties that the station shows that they leaned toward.
You're watching MNN, the Men's Channel.
seems that these are not merely the grumblings of Congress or one presidential party, but many pundits and newspaper commentators. And there are literally enough articles about public television leaning towards a liberal bent that you could literally wallpaper a small-sized room and have enough to go into another. The corporations, all sides, did a survey with over 7,000 participants to see what they thought the political leaning of PBS was. And those participants came back with an opinion that PBS leans left politically. I guess so much for the non-biased opinion. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization All Sides is an American company that assesses the political bias of prominent media outlets and presents different versions of similar news stories for sources of the political of right, left, and center. Now, in a mission to show readers news outside their filter bubble. Now, in the past, they have engaged many other newspapers and media outlets in the same particular manner, so they weren't picking on PBS. But in my opinion, I believe that having a quasi-governmental funded organization makes just about as much sense here in a free society as it does in the Russian Federation with media outlets such as RT, the Russian state-controlled international news television network funded by the Russian government. So we don't want to copy that. I believe if most people did not buy into the fluffiness that goes along with Big Bird or Sesame Street, no one would be advocating for a state-run media with either a liberal or conservative bent. In the land of the free, we criticize and not celebrate state-run media in countries such as North Korea, Burma, Cuba, the former Soviet Union, and some parts of Africa and China. I believe that Republicans' loathing for PBS Network in the modern day goes much deeper than the firing conservative Juan Williams from the network over communicating what he thought in a particular conversation. Conservatives fear that this channel, which has the eyes and ears of the most vulnerable of children, is simply nothing more than an indoctrination of the audience members into the Democratic Party for circular profit. How does the channel get the money back? In essence, grow the child up as you should have them go, and vote the way you want them to vote. But interjecting and leaning towards either party is contrary to public television's bylaws itself. In their own congressionally mandated bylaws, it states under subpart D, section F, that corporation may not contribute to or otherwise support any political party or candidate for elective public office. Point blank, can't do it in the bylaws. The network was made to inform you or your children in matters of education, but not in matters of how to vote. Now, although PBS is succeeding in an area that Congress restricts them from, they are failing in an area they were created to shine. This is evident namely in a mission to inform unserved or underserved audiences. And going back to bylaws of the channel, it states in subpart D, Declaration Policy 6, and I quote, that it is in public interest to encourage the development of programming that involves creative risk and the address the needs of unserved and underserved audiences, particularly children and minorities, end quote. And yet PBS is less diverse than any other broadcast media when it comes to shows. In an article done by The Current entitled Why is Public Media So White? About the lack of diversity at PBS, it was said that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting shared a breakdown of employment data from 2016 to 2017 and presentation slides from its annual State of the System report. The data showed in 2017 the percentage of people of color working at the station reached 23.9%, a 2.4% bump of 2015. Now, the statistics for 2018 showed a decrease of 23% to 20% at minority representation in total workforce. So they are not representing what they say representing. Now, I promised at the top of the program that you would be able to see public TV for what it was doing if you didn't envision it from a feelings point of view. So let me take you through a scenario of supposed public dollars for private television. Now just imagine that a government-funded television station is able to broadcast into your home with your explicit permission to teach you and entertain your smallest of children. Now what if that agency had a governmental party bias, no different than a television bias in a third world country, for its leaders? Now that channel could place the shows and biases in the minds of your small children as they continue to grow into adulthood and eventually voting age. Now this channel would feature in a positive light the leaders that are more positive, ensuring the donation dollars as an organization. Would you call this non-biased journalism? No, I don't think so. Furthermore, this organization is biased in every state and major city and could influence your decision all the way up to the presidential election on the same tax dollars that they receive directly from your paycheck, whether you were Democrat, Republican, or Independent. Now for the record, PBS operates more than 350 television stations, and the sister radio station, NPR, owns about 1,000 radio stations. Does this sound like a small operation or an entity that could easily influence the voting cycle from coast to coast and all taxpayer dollars? And it was seen then that the only winner in this type of biased media would not be you, the viewer, but the stations themselves after they placed the governing body back into office that they had glad-handed their upcoming budgets from. This type of indoctrination for a governmental arm is nothing more than a vicious cycle of brainwashing children to become adults, to teach them how to vote for one party rule, so those leaders could finance the channel, and that channel could help to finance those leaders while fattening their pockets for those elected officials. Now, any other arena of American government, this same behavior would be called taking kickbacks or bribes. So tell us what you think. Should a portion of your paycheck go to fund a corporation that is partially government funded, telling you what you should do and say? Thank you for watching Investigative Report.
And we're clear.